Okay. Um, Good morning, everyone, wherever you're joining from. Happy weekend. In the spirit of being time conscious, I would get this session started because the whole idea is not necessarily about just the in-house audience. It's also about those of us who saw the timing and were clear that, okay, by 10 o'clock I want to join in this conversation. So I'm going to share this link. I'm going to be doing the live streaming myself, so I would go to other pages where I need to post this very quickly. Then I'll be back, and then we'll start having the conversation around the African leadership reality. When did the rain start beating us? That is what we're going to be talking about today. And this is a conversational engagement, so I'm not here to lecture you. And in the disclaimer, I'm no expert in African history. I'm just a young African who is passionate about the continent. And in January, I know we spoke about, personal development, succeeding, how to make the most of 2026 on the platform of Elevated Conversations. And then I felt like this month, let's do a deep dive on the leadership conversation, because we don't talk about it enough. And I think if we're going to move forward as a continent, this is something we need to pay attention to. So I'm going to copy this link and I will drop so that other participants across other platforms can also join in, and then I'll be back. Okay. Okay, this is a bit tricky. I can't seem to find it on my immediate. Okay, so can you, my live is on. Can you pick out, yeah, so can you pick out the link? More like you want to share it. If you want to share, you should be able to pick out the link. Then send to me on WhatsApp. Copy it.
That's it.
Okay. Sorry, we're just trying to. Seems like a slow start, but don't worry, it's going to be very packed. So we'll switch shortly. If you're on my page.
I've copied it.
Okay, good. So drop it as a chat for me on WhatsApp. I'll pick it from there. How are you, by the way?
Fine.
Great.
I sent it.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think we can proceed. So, good morning again. I shared this across some WhatsApp group. Oh, one more, almost done. All right, so I think we are good to go now. All right, so we can start. I want to have fun onto it so that we'll have more lighting. So because the online audience, some are already joining in. So like I said, that's okay. That's the key I had with it, the noise. Maybe we should use the smaller ones. So let's switch to the smaller ones and turn off the aux. Alright, so good morning everyone, wherever you're joining from. My name is Dr. Shedrack. I would be picking up from January. So we started the year, and in January we had what we called our first elevated conversation session, where it was focused on, succeeding in 2026, personal development, what success really means, and the likes. And like I said, in 2020, in February of this month, I felt, okay, let's move the conversation to something else. Not unrelated, but something that gives us a better, a greater perspective about the reality of Africa, as it were. And like I themed it, the African leadership reality. When did the rain start beating us? And this is a very important conversation, because when you look at Africa, if you've had the privilege of traversing a couple of African countries, one thing that we can all agree on, at least from my modest experience, is this: at our foundation, we're not too different. We are alike in more ways than we are different. So that goes to tell you that the pain of a Nigerian isn't too different from the pain of a South African, or the pain of a Ghanaian, or the pain of an Algerian. These realities, one way or another, we share them, we embody them. But sometimes we are tempted as people to act as though there's no connection or there's no relationship between all of these things. And what I want us to do, like I said for this morning, is I'm not here to give you a lecture. I'm not here to give you a masterclass on the African leadership reality. I'm here for us to have a discourse, and that's why the theme is called Elevated Conversations. And I want to begin by reading a letter. So this is a 3-page letter, which I'm going to be reading. And it's going to form the basis of our conversation. So this letter was written in 2023. Sorry, 2013, right? That's about 16 years ago. Yeah. And it was written to somebody who was not even alive at that time. That person was Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana. And the letter was written by the then African Union Commission chairperson, Dr. Nkosazana Zuma. She's a South African politician and one of the anti-apartheid fighters or activists during the apartheid regime. She wrote this letter and tagged it a futuristic letter to Kwame Nkrumah in 2026. And I want you to pay attention to what I'm going to read, because like I said, it is going to form the basis of our conversation. And perhaps what I would request of us as we are joining, for those of us joining online, please push this link to the groups you are part of, to your own timeline. Let's have more persons joining this conversation. I fear that for a lot of us in Africa, we are too uninterested about the reality of our continent. Now, I think there's a consequence to that, because we think that it does not affect us. But when you look at the reality of Africa holistically, one thing that bites one African country has a way of getting back to another directly or indirectly. Now, case in point, Libya. When Muammar Gaddafi was toppled some years ago, it seemed as though that thing, it was a Libya problem. But a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa today are in a huge mess simply because of the destabilization of Libya, right? And that is what I want us to pay a lot of attention to this morning. So let me read the letter, and it's quite an interesting piece. And like I said, pay attention. Okay. So I'm coming. I'm still learning to navigate things. So I don't I don't do a lot. Okay. Of life, so I'm learning to navigate it. So pardon me if I'm a bit slow at some point. So, dear Kwame, and remember this letter, like I said, is to Kwame Nkrumah, right? So, and it's written by the chairperson of the African Union Commission. An email from 2063. We are in 2026. So this is a letter to the future. I want to establish that context. Date of this letter was on January 24th, 2063 to Kwame Nkrumah, and the subject is African unity. My dear friend Kwame, greetings to the family and friends and good health and best wishes for 2063. I write to you from the beautiful Ethiopian city of Bahir Dar, as we finalize preparation for the centenary celebrations of the Organization of African Unity. Yes, who would have thought that the dream of Kwame Nkrumah and his generations, when they were called in 1963 on Africans to unite or perish, would one day become a reality? And what a grand reality. At the beginning of the 21st century, and for context, the 21st century began at the turn of 1999. We used to get irritated with foreigners when they treated Africa as one country. And it still happens. It still happens. There are people across the continent, outside of Africa, that think Africa is a country. But the advancing global trends towards regional blocks reminded us that integration and unity is the only way for Africa to leverage its competitive advantage. In fact, if Africa was one country in 2006, we would have been the 10th largest economy in the world. However, instead of acting as one with virtually every resource in the world, land, oceans, minerals, energy, and over 1 billion people, so we're over 1 billion in 2006, we acted as 55 small, fragmented individual countries. The bigger countries that should have been the locomotives of African integration failed to play their role at the time. And that is part of the reasons it took us so long. We did not realize our power, but instead relied on donors that we euphemistically called partners. That was the case in 2013. But reality finally dawned, and we had long debates about the form that our unity should take. Confederation, a United States, a federation, or a union. As you can see, my friend, these debates are over, and the Confederation of African States is now 12 years old, launched in 2051. So Nkosi is saying that while this letter is to 2063, 10 years prior or more, or 12 years prior, we now have a confederation. So what was interesting was the role played by successive generations of African youths. Interesting. And this is where I wanted to start paying attention, because it's going to form the crux of our conversation. We were a youthful continent at the start of the 21st century. But as our youth bulge grew, young men and women became even more active, creative, impatient, and assertive, often telling us oldies that they are the future. And they, together with women, form the largest part of the electorate in all of our countries. And that's the reality as it were up until now. Of course, this was but one of the drivers towards unity. The accelerated implementation of the Abuja Treaty and the creation of the African Economic Community by 2034, this is still futuristic. Remember, we are in 2026. So economic integration moved to unexpected levels. Economic integration coupled with infrastructure development saw intra-Africa trade
mushrooming from less than 12% in 2013 to approaching 50% by 2045. And for context, our trade now between African countries, I think, is somewhere around 15 to 20%. Still very low. Even more significant than this was the growth of regional manufacturing hubs around the beneficiations of our minerals and natural resources, such as in the Eastern Congo, the Northeastern Angola, and Zambia's copper belt at the major silicon valleys in Kigali, Alexandria, Brazzaville, Maseru, Lagos, Mombasa, to mention but a few such hubs. My friend, Africa has indeed transformed herself from an exporter of raw materials with a declining manufacturing sector in 2013 to becoming a major food exporter, a global manufacturing hub, a knowledge center, and a beneficiation of our natural resources and agricultural products as drivers to industrialization. Pan-African companies from mining to finance, food and beverages, hospitality and tourism, pharmaceuticals, fashion, fisheries, and ICT are driving integration and are amongst the global leaders in their sectors. We are now the third largest economy in the world. We did this by finding the balance between market forces and strong and accountable developmental states and regional economic communities to drive infrastructure, the provision of social services, industrialization, and economic integration. We refuse to bear the brunt of climate change and aggressively move to promote the green economy and to claim the blue economy as ours. We lit up Africa, the formerly dark continent, using hydro, solar, wind, geothermal energy, in addition to fossil fuels. If I have to single out one issue that made peace happen, it was our commitment to invest in our people, especially the empowerment of young people and women. By 2013, we said Africa needed a skills revolution, that we must change our education systems to produce young people that are innovative and entrepreneurial with a strong Pan-African values. From early childhood education to primary, secondary, technical, vocational, and higher education, we experienced a true renaissance through the investments we made as government and the private sector in education, in technology, science, research, and innovation. Kwame, the African Express Rail now connects all capitals of our former states. It is not only a high-speed train, but adjacent highways, but also contains pipelines for gas, oil, and water, as well as ICT broadband cables. African ownership, integrated planning, and execution at its best. The continental rail and road network that now crisscross Africa, along with our vibrant airlines, are a spectacular landscape and seductive sunsets. The cultural vibes of our cities makes tourism one of our largest economic sectors. Kiswahili is now a major African working language and a global language that taught at most faculties across the world. Our grandchildren still find it very funny how we used to struggle at AU meetings with English, French, and Portuguese interpretations. How we used to fight the English version not in line with the French or Arabic. Now we have a lingua franca, and multilingualism is the order of the day. How things have changed. The Confederation last year celebrated 20 years since we took our seat as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. And we are a major force for global stability, peace, human rights, progress, tolerance, and justice. Till we meet again. Nkosi Sazana. Now, this is the letter that was written to Kwame Nkrumah, futuristic letter, written as though we are in 2026. And I read this letter to form a premise of what we are going to be saying, or what we're going to be conversing with this morning. Africa. Now, let's go back to history. What does history tell us about this beautiful continent? This continent that is regarded as the most richest continent in potential. This continent that is said that the minerals in her belly can power the world over and still retain what it wants for itself. This continent that is said that Congo alone has the amount of land mass that can feed half of the world's population. That is the continent I want us to talk about. If you go through history, it is said that Africa had civilization before even the rest of the world caught up with us. And that is why Egypt is regarded as a fountain of knowledge. They said civilization started in Egypt. If you go through history, we are told that people like Socrates, like Archimedes, visited Africa. We're told that Socrates actually visited Nigeria in the southwest, what is now southwest of Nigeria, to interface with one of the philosophers of that age. That is the continent I want to talk about today. Now, if you look through history, through the economic eras or the different revolutions, talking about the agricultural revolution, talking about the industrial revolution, talking about the ICT age, the digital, and now the age of artificial intelligence. Now let's go back to the agricultural industrialization. That age, when the world over was improving on the different ways with which they produce food, where was Africa? That age when the rest of the world was finding its balance around trying to make things work for their continent, where was Africa? If you look at history at the time of the agricultural age, it was a time when Africa was heavily being pilfered in human resource. And we can call it slave trade. When thousands of ships were loaded on the African coast and headed for the Caribbean. But even before then, there's history that we should not forget. You know, our history talks more about the transatlantic slave trade, which was perpetrated by Europeans. But we don't talk a lot about the trans-Saharan slave trade. The one where the Arabs were the ones taking Africans out of the continent to sell off. The one where African men were taken to Arab nations and castrated as eunuchs. And if you read our religious books, whether the Bible, you see times when you will read where they take slaves, and when they say you're a eunuch, you just look up the meaning. So it was a painful era. So much so that as a man, if you're castrated, your lineage, that's the end. There's nothing more that can be done for you. So the Arabian era of slave trade, according to history, emptied the African continent to the tune of over 12 million people. 12 million. There are countries in this world that don't have a population of up to 2 million. If you go to Uganda is less than 10 million people, if memory serves me correctly. Now it's like a whole country was taken away. So this happened for several years, and this trade started as early as the 7th century. So it was one of the longest lasting eras of man's injustice to man. So while the rest of the world was building for themselves, Africa was taken away to build for other continents. Shortly afterwards, the transatlantic slave trade kicked in, where across Nigeria, Ghana, Zambia, you name them, Africans were also moved across the continent. It is also documented that more than 1 million Africans didn't make it to the other side, meaning they were either thrown aboard because they were sick, or they died at sea and were thrown into the ocean. So in the cotton fields in the Caribbean, Africans were the ones powering this process. There are some publications that say that the industrialization of Europe was done off the back of slave trade. Now move from the agriculture era, which we have established, and this is not me establishing it, this is, the records are there, to the industrial age when a lot of Africans were still being forced to this process. Slave trade, of course, at that time started losing its flavor, if I would use that word. At this time, the colonial masters now gathered together in Berlin in 1884. And that is where Africa was parceled into what we regard now as our 54 or 55 countries. So it was a matter of, this is the piece I'm taking for myself. This is the one where you should take for yourself. 54. Because at that point, slave trade, was no longer, the world was saying this thing needs to end. But instead of saying let's end it outrightly, that was not the conversation. It was let's evolve into something else. So at that time, you had Africans being loaded on ships. In Liberia, for instance, is the returning slaves from the Caribbean and other countries that were brought into Liberia, and then they settled there. So when this parceling happened, Nigeria, of course, was one of the outcomes of that, and several other African countries as we know it today. So the colonial masters moved in with one singular objective of mopping up whatever can be mopped out of Africa, from our artifacts to our raw materials. We have seen several repatriations coming back into the continent today. Now, at the turn of the 19th century, precisely around the 1910s to the 1920s, the agitation for independence now starts rising. At that time, we now start having the African National Congress. We start having Pan-African agitations happening very loudly. We now start having Americans of African descent, even in the thick of America and other European countries, now saying the continent must be free. Fast forward to the 1940s, when the young men of our continent, and let me read something in that letter that Nkosi Zana wrote. She says that what was interesting was the role played by successive generations of African youth. Now, why I'm highlighting this is because as young people, we are forgetting that every consequential outcome that has happened on the African continent was driven off the back of young people. During the slave trade, the prime people that were sold off were young people. If you were old, you were killed because you had no value. During the Arab trade fairs, our young women attracted more money because of their ability to reproduce. So youthfulness has had consequence from the beginning of time till date. So if you now pay attention to this from the context of what I'm now saying, the 1940s, we now have the era of the likes of Kwame Nkrumah. We now have the likes of Patrice Lumumba, Haile Selassie. We have not Jomo Kenyatta now. Tafawa Balewa. We have I want to come back home now. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Herbert Macaulay. These people who now say we need Africa to work for Africa. These agitations continue to the point when Ghana gets her independence in 1957. Then other African countries followed to Nigeria and the likes. But what was instructive at that time when our African leaders now started coming together, when Kwame Nkrumah hosted the African leaders in 1961, there were less than 10 African countries at the time that had their independence. And he said something very fundamental, that as Africa, if we fail to take advantage of this moment of transformation, then we would, in our very eyes, still lose this so-called independence that we are craving for. So in that conversation, he said that let us look at how we can consolidate ourselves as one Africa without necessarily giving up our own sovereignties. Because at the time, the country had been parceled out to 54 different pieces. Now, what was now the lesson that we missed at that time? Because while the era had moved from colonialism to neo-colonialism, it meant that the colonial masters were still with us, just in a different form. And as if it will not be true, or as if what Kwame Nkrumah was saying was a vision or a prophecy he was making, 1 year after, even 1 year, few months after, Patrice Lumumba of Congo was killed. And I think it's some years ago that the person who killed or who shot him after he was taken up said the only thing that was recovered from Patrice Lumumba was his tooth. Because history tells us that he was dissolved in sulfuric acid. Now, till today that we're talking about this history, Congo has never been the same again. Look at the crisis in Congo. A supposedly documented country to be the richest country on earth, till today has not known stability. Kwame Nkrumah, who had made this call for the continent to unite, again they get to meet in 1963 in Addis Ababa under the patronage of Emperor Haile Selassie. In that meeting, there were 32 African leaders, 32 of them. In Nigeria, we had representation from Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, who was the Prime Minister of Nigeria at the time. If you have the opportunity to have read through the speeches of all of these 32 leaders, their message was one and the same, even though it carried different flavors. Africa cannot function in isolation. Meaning that as we are, in principle at the time, 32 countries, if we do not unite as one entity, we can never make any progress. He spoke about the trappings of power. That if you as Nigeria or Liberia or Ghana or South Africa or Algeria decide that you want to operate as your individual entities, we cannot amount to anything. But if we come up together as a country, reflected as a continent, but working as a united bloc, then we can do more together. He said that let us not leave this meeting without agreeing to have one currency, to have one military, to have one foreign policy, without necessarily dissolving our sovereignty. So he meant that in Nigeria, we are still Nigeria. Ghana, we are still Ghanaians. Liberia, we are still Liberians. But we would pursue one central agenda. The wisdom of that was that at the time, the continent had a population of about 300 million people. So if we came together as a bloc, we would pursue one African agenda. But no, we didn't listen. Or they didn't listen that at the time. So we all went home. And then the spree of coup d'etats now started happening. In Nigeria, we saw our own in 1956. I mean, in 1965, 1966. And then the civil war broke out. We saw what happened in Ghana Kwame Nkrumah not only was toppled, every single thing he had written and documented was wiped off. So for somebody like Kwame, at the time they said reading anything written by Kwame Nkrumah was a taboo. Remember too that when Patrice Lumumba was being pursued to be captured, it was not the Belgians that were chasing him. It was Africans. When the triggers that ended the lives of our prime minister or the other leaders in the coup of 1966, it was not foreign bullets or foreign fingers that pulled those triggers. When the coups that were happening across the different parts of the continent were happening, it was Africans that were mobilized against Africa. And let me refresh our minds with Thomas Sankara. That man that came on board and then named his country Burkina Faso, meaning land of the upright. That man that came and at the time when the world was not talking about climate change, planted 1 million trees. That man that came, and it was during Thomas Sankara that he enforced things like, maternity leave was mostly for women. He enforced it that when your wives are pregnant, men should be allowed to go home and take care of the house to support the women. It was during Thomas Sankara that he was able to build a railway in his country without collecting any external aid. This is the same Thomas Sankara that through the what was the word? Influence of France and the hand of Blaise Compaoré and the unpatriotic elements ended his life and took his body away. So I think in Africa, we have had a history where we are notorious for vilifying the very people who have stood for us and only celebrating them when they have died and gone. We never speak good of people who have put their life on the line to make it work for our continent. But when things have gone bad and they have died away, we now say, I wish we listened. This letter by Nkosi Sizzana is written to the future, but it also carries the roadmap of what Africa must do to succeed. So I have tried to lay down a journey of Africa through different industrial eras, of when we didn't have control of our affairs to now when we have control of our affairs. And the fundamental question now is posed: when did the rain start beating us? Why do we hear of a time when even in Nigeria, power supply was good? A time in Nigeria when our rail systems were working, when the granite pyramids of Kano were something to boast about, when we are told that Malaysia came to our country to come and get palm fruit seeds, and today they are giants in the industry of palm oil. At what point did we fail? At what point did we drop the ball as a continent? When today we will read news where Africans are perishing in the Mediterranean on a daily basis because they have said, I need to leave Africa to succeed. Where even when they are rescued, they say, please don't take me back. I watched something this happening some years ago, where some Nigerians were rescued in Libya, where modern slave trade is still happening. And the persons were saying on camera that, please don't take me back to Nigeria. What is that thing that makes you feel so scared of even running back to your own home country, even after being rescued from a disaster? What is that thing that has made it so bad that a parent, one of the metrics to which a parent will say I've succeeded is that I've helped my child leave the continent of Africa? That today my child is in the UK or in the US or in Canada, so I know that their future is secured. That is not the continent that our founding fathers fought for. In 1980, on this continent, in fact, in this country, Nigeria, African leaders met in Lagos and formulated what is called the Lagos Plan of Action. This was off the back of the recent oil crisis that had happened in the 1970s. And they said, with the realities of the time, Africa must trade more together. Africa must unite more together. Africa must work more together. These were the points that were highlighted very loudly in the Lagos Plan of Action. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in 2026. And today, our intra-Africa trade volume across the continent is still less than 20%. As an African, an American, a European, a Canadian has more access to more African countries than you and I do. That if I want to leave West Africa now, I need a visa. That if I want to go to South Africa now, I need to go and pay for a visa interview. And if the person interviewing me has a problem with Nigerians, I'm going to have a hard time. That it is possible that I will apply for a visa to want to go to Zambia and it might not come out early enough and I will not be able to attend that program. That I would likely be in Dakar, Senegal, and to cross over to Algeria, which in terms of flight hours is not up to 5, I will need a visa. So, in effect, that plan of action did not translate to any tangible outcomes we can talk about. Our leaders also met in Rwanda and said, let the skies be open. Africans should be able to move freely. How many African countries today are visa-free? How many African countries today can allow you pick your passport anytime fee, face the road or jump on a plane and go where you want to go simply because you're an African? But these are the things that our founding fathers agreed to in 1963, that if we are going to move forward as a continent, we must resolve cohesively without necessarily sacrificing our sovereignty. Then in 2013, our leaders came together again and formulated what is called the Africa 2063 agenda. Now, how many young Africans even know about the Africa 2063 agenda? If you ask them, they might know about the SDGs. They might know about sustainable development goals, but how many Africans, especially young Africans, know about the 2063 agenda? How many of them are aware of the 7 pillars upon which this agenda is built on? When this was being done, we agreed as a continent. I'm saying we because we are all complicit. We agreed as a continent that the guns will be silenced on this continent by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, 6 years after, the guns are louder than they were before. As Nigerians, you will dare not take off from one part of the country to another and do a 24 hours road trip. Once it gets dark, you stop and sleep to continue the next day. As an African, can you guarantee your safety to take off from Lagos, cross through Benin, or any other part of the sub-Saharan region without fear of being kidnapped or killed? Which African country today is not struggling in one form of insurgency or one form of insecurity or the other? How can Africa thrive off the back of such? How can that agenda be achieved if even amongst ourselves trust is lacking? Where if we have a problem as a continent today, or one country has a problem, he will not think of the neighbor. He thinks of the West. Where our leaders trust more what the Western economic blocks or the Asian economic blocks can give them rather than what we can bring together to the table. How can a continent thrive like that? So the question is, when did the rain start beating us? If we agree in principle that our leaders were crystal clear on the problems of the African continent, at what point did we miss it? I will tell you. At that point when leadership was no longer about service, at that point when leadership was meant to serve personal egos and serve personal interests, that was when the rain started beating us. At that point when we failed to remember that Africa cannot work off a disaggregated plan. It is in our lifetime, ladies and gentlemen, that China took out 800 million people out of poverty. 800 million. In our lifetime. It is in our lifetime that we have seen countries like Vietnam, which today we watch movies around the Vietnam War, which was bombed to the ground, today is an economic power. But the goal is not for us to lament forever. The goal is so that we do a bit of self-reflection. So that we ask ourselves these fundamental questions and stop thinking that the conversation on leadership is the one that you just pick a particular block and discuss and then go away. What does history teach us so that we learn from it? Agreed, over our evolution, Africa has been traumatized. Africa has been traumatized so badly that we don't even believe that our thing is good enough because the white man says it's not good enough. Or we need the white man to say what we are doing is good before it's good. But we had systems of governance even before the slave trade. We had systems of governance on how we're resolving our problems. And think about the case in point. At the time when the US got their independence from Europe, Europe didn't tell the US how to run their affairs. They decided the governance structures and systems that work for them. Why is it that we are not also in Africa trying to find the right governance system that will speak and work for us as Africans? Where in the same political structure, there's no unified approach to governance. Where every single political bloc that comes into power has their own agenda they want to execute. How can we grow like that? So these are the things that we must reflect about. And I say this so that we young people will be more conscious. And I understand our dilemma as young people. If you ask 10 out of young people that you ask a question about whether they want to migrate out of the country, maybe 10 out of 10 will tell you that they want to leave. Will you blame them? Because survival is at the very basic of our very existence. So if what we call home no longer serves that purpose, naturally, we would want to attempt to gravitate to where at least we can be able to guarantee our survival. Of course, this drive has led a lot of young people to leave the country against their wishes and are in regrets in different places of the world. But that speaks to the failure of leadership on the continent. A continent so blessed that it is the only continent that we do not have a ceiling over our head. But a continent that has refused to work for the people of its land. So, again, where did the rain start beating us? I want to draw the conversation home because I see our engagements in the comments, and I hope that we'll drop some questions, we'll drop our reflections, so that we ask ourselves, where do we go from here as young people? And I'm not speaking from a perspective of you know, I don't hold a political office, right? Perhaps for all of us listening, we don't. Does that mean we have no role to play? The answer is no. And that is where I want us to play the role of what we call active citizens. In Greek, it is said that they categorize the people into 3 blocks. Block number 1, they call them the idiots. Block number 2, they call them the tribalists. And block number 3, they call them the citizens. The idiots are the ones who don't care about anything. As long as the house burning is not my own, I'm fine. Those are the ones tagged as idiots. They don't care if society is functioning or not. As long as they are thriving off it, they are fine. Then the tribalists are the ones who are interested in what is happening, but they are about self-preservation of their tribes. So while they value competence, as long as that competent person is not from their tribe or from their block, they are not interested. And then there are the citizens. These are the ones that don't care where you come from. These are the ones that will move through the streets, and if there's something they need to be able to pick and throw away so that it does not harm the next person, they will do it. These are the ones that will show up on the weekend to open up a drainway so that it no longer floods the neighborhood. You might ask yourself, which block are you? In Nigeria like this, in Ghana, in whatever country at all you are, which block do you belong to? But the good thing is that for all of these blocks, there's hope for all of us. Whether you fall into the block of the idiots or the tribalists, there's hope for you to transform into a citizen. And as electorates, we are so guilty of so many things. We say we want functional systems, yet we either do not participate in the processes or we align based on petty polemics, where because it is not my person, I'm not interested. Where we sit on social media and analyze from tomorrow till forever, but when it comes to voting, we never show up. The lesson that our founding fathers taught us, and for some of them they paid the supreme price, was that talk is cheap. And if you want to reform a system, you must step up and do the needful. So for Africa, and it is in this month of February, based on the search I made, that the African Union states or our leaders will also aggregate again in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And this is my message to our leaders, all 54 or 55 leaders of Africa. The young person is saying something. We have seen that young people are now more agitated, more impatient, more interested in the governance of the continent. They are saying that for now you have not met up to those obligations. That if you are still a leader in the African continent where a visa is still needed to make entrance into your country, then you're failing us. That if I cannot freely move from one African country to another, then you're failing us. That if another continent, a citizen from another continent has more access and leverage in the African continent upon which I draw bread from than myself, you're failing us. What will it take to lift non-tariff barriers, like declaring that an African will not require a visa to enter another African country? Can we have that as the first agenda on your list? The agenda of a visa-free Africa. So that we stop this continuous gathering where we end up with a lot of resolutions, conventions, declarations, only with the consequence of inaction. So that the young man and the young women across Africa will have the right agency to move and develop their creativity and passion and commitment to advancing the development of the continent. Last year, I could not travel to 2 different African countries off the back of visas that didn't come on time. I went to other programs when other Africans could not make it because they could not get visas in time. That is creativity lost. That is opportunity for exposure lost. So we cannot keep claiming that the white man sabotaged our growth up until 1960, and then we are also consciously sabotaging it on things that we can easily, by a simple declaration, resolve. So for the African young man and young woman listening, the message is this. Let our leaders know that at the end of their meeting in Addis Ababa in 2026, if we still have barriers around entry for Africans, then they have failed us. When Africans come out, at least for the countries that have declared visa-free entry, Rwanda, Kenya, Burkina Faso, and I don't want to talk about the ones that require visa on arrival. I'm talking about the ones that you just come in, you have your business stamped, and then you are able to continue whatever business you're coming to achieve. 1960 till now, and we still have barriers to African ease of entry. We are failing ourselves. This is not the Africa that Kwame Nkrumah envisioned. This is not the Africa that Patrice Lumumba died for. This is not the Africa that Abubakar Tafawa Balewa or Haile Selassie or Thomas Sankara or any of the leaders you can think about on the continent. This is not the Africa they envisioned. So if we want to pay homage in truth and in action to what Africa wants, or to what the yearnings of the young person wants, make it easy for Africans to move. There are several opportunities that we can work together as a continent on that today we can't, simply because these limitations are holding us back. So let's draw now the conversation back home. Let's now come back home and ask ourselves the fundamental things that needs to happen differently for us to turn this tide. Because if we do not, that letter to Kwame Nkrumah in 2026, in 2063, will simply be a pipe dream. Because the current structure on the continent is not set up to make it work. It is not meant to make it work. When Nyerere of Tanzania was asked about development in Africa, he said that the American can go to the moon for all he cares, but let the African have food to eat. Let the young man have jobs to go to. Let them have the environment that enables them thrive in their buckets of creativity. Let them be able to collaborate. So African leaders must define development in the context that reflects our own reality. Not saying things that we cannot relate to. Not talking about realities that we cannot connect to, as it were now. And until we do that, we might as well keep singing this song, but the melody will never come out. And we need to reverse this tide sooner than later. We are seeing the world system evolve. Donald Trump is championing America first. The UK is saying that we must prioritize the citizens. Countries are now activating the self-preservation mood. The African continent is 1.4 billion strong. Think about that number for a minute. Which country in the world can absorb that volume of migration? So our best bet is to now consolidate efforts as a continent and work in a way that serves our collective interest for us to grow. So that I can close my eyes today and jump on the bus knowing that I can ride my way as far as Dakar, Senegal with a straight line road that takes me to such a distance, if it's practical. So while I might not articulate the geography as with the perfection of a geographist, the message is simple. Open up Africa. And it is not in my hands because I do not hold political office. It is also likely not in the hands of the young person who is listening because we all don't. And that is why until we elevate the quality of political leadership on the African continent, we are going nowhere. We go for conferences and you see some of our leaders and you feel sorry. What did you come here to do? What did you bring back home for us? So this is a consciousness that we must build into ourselves if we are going to be able to advance this continent that we so much regard as ours. So that young people stop exiting the continent simply on survival mood. Because if the opportunities are here, what exactly is somebody going to a place where the weather is not suited for the person and the person at best might even die under 1 year because the economic environment does not support it? How many Africans have died in the crisscross of the Russia-Ukrainian war? How many Africans have died there because they have been conscripted on both sides to fight a war that they have no connection to? What were the drivers? They saw opportunity. They felt this would be an opportunity to earn. I hope this would be that moment of reawakening where we tell ourselves these fundamental truths. Africa will never wake up if we don't see that sense of self-responsibility. And let us think about those examples that have worked. In Africa, this continent of ours, do you remember that the Rwandan genocide happened in our lifetime? When the world sat down and folded their arms, including us Africans, and maybe wrote off Rwanda. Millions died. Rwanda today is a shining star in Africa. Kigali is one of the neatest cities, perhaps one of the neatest cities in the world today. I visited there and the cities, the roads were beautiful. And when they were giving us a tour guide, he said that as Rwandans, we cannot rub off the sad history that we witnessed as a continent or as a country. But we are committed at all costs to ensure it never happens. That is the kind of commitment that we need to make as a continent. We need to agree that despite winning our independence and now existing as 55 independent countries, we have failed to marshal our capabilities to the extent to which we can progress as a nation. But now we admit that error, and we want to be able to move forward with more resolution. So that as a country, we start thinking about our existence, even if, and I'm not saying, it's not practical to say dissolve all and then turn it into one country. But let us take home the advice that Kwame Nkrumah gave us. He said, without compromising our sovereignty, can we have one currency? You know, I was in Kenya last year in December. And I don't know what happened to me. I got to the airport and I was a bit late, so I forgot and I didn't do a currency swap. And then I got into Kenya, Nairobi. And My first problem started when I needed to pay the Uber ride to take me to the hotel where I was going to stay. Luckily, I reached out to a friend. She was able to marshal, get pay on my behalf, and then I got into the hotel. The second problem started. When I got in, I needed to check in, and then I think I needed to make a payment. Oh God, I had some crispy 1,000 naira notes. The receptionist didn't care. I mean, I said, will you take my naira? She said, and it's not like I didn't know she won't take it. But it spoke fundamentally to the sad reality of Africa. A continent with over 33 currencies, where outside of your country, your currency is useless. But if I pulled out $1, she would have smiled back at me. If I pulled out a pound or a euro, she would have smiled back at me. A continent where my naira would not have any power beyond the shores of Nigeria. Where your cedi as a Ghanaian would do nothing for you outside of Ghana. How can we function like that as a continent? But you go to Europe, and your euro is functioning regardless of the country in Europe you're finding yourself in. Why is it so difficult to resolve this? Where even as an economic bloc, as ECOWAS, they will not collect my naira in Ghana. But if I bring out $1, I tell you they'll collect it. As SADC, if you brought out your currency in Zimbabwe or South Africa, does it have potency beyond your country? As East Africa, as Central Africa, these are questions we must ask ourselves. And we ask it so that the leader will know that our founding fathers today will be turning in their graves because some fundamental things that would have resolved and escalated our growth are still things that we are discussing on a daily basis every year when we gather together as leaders. So we need to pay attention to this so that it tells our minds to a continent that will work and why it will never work if we don't correct some of these blocks or some of these challenges. The Africa Free Trade Area or Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement has been signed a couple of years ago. But how can I trade with South Africa when it is more difficult for me to move my products from Nigeria to South Africa than another person doing it from Asia into the same country? Where as a continent, our trade volume is not up to 20%. Yet our trade volume with other countries like the US is more than 60%. How can we exist like that as a continent? When our collective GDP as a continent, if you just bring Tesla, Microsoft, and Facebook together, that is our entire GDP. Where the total budget of a particular country in the continent is a marketing budget on another company. Go and look at the marketing budget of Coca-Cola. And when you look at it, go and Google the side by side with the budget of developmental budget of a country. In my country, I'm trying to remember this accord. He said that we will dedicate 15% of our budget to agriculture. The closest we have gone is 3.5%. How can you develop on the back of that? How can we cannot, as a country or as a continent, we cannot import our way to sustainability. We cannot import our way to sustainability. We cannot. We can open the borders all we want, but what we are continually doing is impoverishing our very own selves. The American farmer is the heartbeat of the United States. So despite they are less than 5%, they are producing the food supply both for the nation and what they are going to export to the rest of the world. For us in Nigeria, when we have interventions in agriculture, do they even reach the farmer? Is it not even turned into a political tool where it's decided who should get it and who should not get it? How much are we committed to agriculture end to end, and we say we want to be able to move? And you see, let history remind us of some of the things we have done right and for where we have failed. If once upon a time in this country, we were food self-sufficient in food, at least to a certain extent, where did we go wrong? And why are we not retracing those steps? It is not rocket science. So what do we need to do to retrace these steps? I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but and so I talked about the example of Rwanda and how they moved from a nation that was written off to becoming a shining star today in Africa. Kenya today is a destination for innovation. Nigeria, Lagos precisely, is a destination for innovation. Botswana exports her beef to Europe. So there are working examples we can learn from. Our economic systems, especially in the banking sector, holds a lot of exciting examples of what is possible. We see what the champions across these spaces are doing. How can we amplify these examples to become a norm rather than isolated outcomes? So when Kwame said, and okay, I don't have that captured here. When Kwame said that let us not dissolve our sovereignty, it is going to be needless, it can never happen. But let us have one command center. Looking back, doesn't that make sense? And over the years, haven't Africa shown capacity to solve Africa's problems? Look at Liberia. When Liberia was a war zone, it wasn't the UN that came to solve that. It was ECOMOG led by Nigeria. When Zambia was going to have an issue, it was the Nigerian Air Force planes that went there and solved that problem. And perhaps it goes to say that at every single time that Nigeria took its rightful leadership position on the African continent, the change and the impact was palpable. During apartheid, have we forgotten the role Nigeria played in that? Forget about the online banter between Nigeria, South Africa, Nigeria, Uganda. It doesn't count eventually when we're having the real facts and having those conversations. The impact of Nigeria as a country on the African continent can never be, you cannot water it down. But we need to stop banking only on this past glory and take up our rightful place on this continent of ours, so that we are able to champion this change as it should be. So let's hear your thoughts. We have some persons here physically in the hall, and I have been speaking non-stop for the last 1 hour 20 minutes. So I'm going to stop now because I want to hear our thoughts. So I'm going to go through the chat too. I'm seeing my mentor join, and I want to acknowledge very quickly my mentor, Dr. Gani Enahoro, who is joining us, and I see his very, insightful comments in the comment section. He made a comment to say, indeed, Africa continues to limit itself as a continent without the recognition of currencies beyond the shores of their countries, and that is just the reality. That is just the reality. So we need to harmonize it. Maybe, I think there was a time they even proposed a currency where they called it the Afro, which was going to be the one currency that unifies all of our currencies. West Africa proposed the ECO. But how far have we gone with all of this? Shouldn't this be the thing that should concern our political leadership, so that we do not digress from those things that fundamentally will shape our very existence? We see more agitations from young people now. We saw it in Kenya. We saw it in Tanzania. We saw it in Uganda. We have seen it in Nigeria multiple times. I think there's a message being sent. And it's important that the political leadership listens and understands these yearnings. The African young person is not asking for too much. We're simply asking for a system that works for us. Not every African is keen on exiting this continent. A lot of us are committed to building and contributing our quota to advancing this continent right here at home. So, let me see. Okay, there are quite a lot in the comments. So, are there any thoughts, to those of us who are here physically, are there any thoughts you want to share out? Are there any reflections you want to put out too on this beautiful continent of ours, and what we think we need to do differently or what we need to do better? Because I don't want us to sound like we want to build castles in the air. What are those practical leadership conversations we need to have with one another that points us to a situation whereby we are saying Africa is on the right path? And like I said, a couple of African countries are. If there's a country that says, come to my country, you don't need a visa, that is a progressive country. Yes. The restrictions, they need to go. The restrictions needs to be lifted. We can't be in today's Africa when, as a Nigerian, a US citizen has more access to African countries than I do. It's an indictment on us as a continent. We can't progress like that. We can't be an Africa where it's, I need to move from Dakar, Senegal to Algeria, and when I looked up flight options, some were taking me to Doha in Qatar before they would bring me back to Algeria. Some were going to take me to Rome before they would bring me back to Algeria. Some are going to take me to Paris. So it's only in Africa where you jump on a plane from Abuja to go to maybe to go to, let me try out an example. Maybe to go to Nairobi, Kenya, that you first go to Doha before they route you back to, especially when you're on foreign airlines. We can never ever progress like that. Why have we not collectively invested as African leaders into one airline? Even if we want to do this inter-country thing, and other countries have, Ethiopian Airline is a shining example. It's one of the most, I think it's the only profitable airline on the African continent. And then you see the way they operate. So, what are our thoughts on this subject matter of the African leadership? What I've tried to do is share my thoughts on when I think the rain started beating us. The second era of leaders who took off from the first set, I think they lost their ideology. Because if a leader is the one that brought independence to you, and less than 1 year after that, you contribute to having him killed and he's dissolved in sulfuric acid, I don't know. If a leader that in your lifetime changed not only the name of your country, planted 1 million trees, grew your GDP, made you food sufficient, yet you gun him down at the patronage of a Western powers? I don't know. And you know, there's a funny way we do this thing, and we think that, that's why I say to young people that anytime you are joining an agitation, please understand it very well. Understand it very well, because you might end up pushing an agenda you have no control over or you know nothing about. Are we having a failure of leadership in Africa? Absolutely. And if we are having such scenarios, we Africans must learn how to figure out the path forward ourselves, rather than thinking someone else has our best interest. Every single part of the world is dealing with their own problems. And that is where I feel we have continuously failed ourselves. We get angry and we say, to hell with it, let's burn down the whole house. And then we all sit down in the rain and start lamenting, because there's no roof over our head, because we burnt it down. So, yeah.
From all of you said, I think one thing we can use to practice is something, I'm sure what you're doing, trying to make us citizens independent. Politics, when all this is happening, they tend to be mischievous and then people act out of convenience.
Yeah. Yeah.
The average people, the average people, what do you want? I want to make money. Why do you want to make money? I want to marry black.
G-Wagon. Or in Nigeria, they mess this.
Yes. You understand? Okay. After that, what? Hand with girls or guys. The girls want to date the rich guy.
Yeah.
And the average young lady is not looking at how can I have something
Yeah.
and also carry on as well. Then there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And the pressure comes with a clouding of the mind.
Yeah.
That is because the priorities are not.
Mm.
So I think one way we can do to influence ourselves, what would the young generation know about leadership?
Yeah.
What the young generation think they can contribute, because many feel helpless.
Yeah.
They feel, don't do anything, I'm not like the new guys out there. But I think that's a limitation of the time.
Yeah.
Let me say now, want to explain something
Yeah.
or a country. It's not old type of skills, type of enslaving their mind to think that they don't have what it takes to get what they want.
Yeah.
They need to be reliant, and being reliant now leads to entitlement.
Yeah.
And when the entitlement is not settled, you can settle. That's why just small things due to that we need to break.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the old people are exploiting that. That's what the old people. And then when are we going to become leaders? And people who become leaders, so looking at the people in step of becoming leaders.
Yeah.
You know, so like this one gets into power, I wish there was something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I think the practical step is you need to reshape the mindset and the thought culture of young people to see that they are the solution to our problem. They are the cause of our problem, and it's an in-house thing. We don't need to wait for people outside to come and see them. And to also see that the progress of one person is the progress of the nation.
Yeah.
So that, especially in, let's bring it in the team community.
Yeah.
You can see that we are not progressing because people feel entitled. And somebody got something and did not give me. I don't know what did you help me to get it? So I want to take a practical example of you now. Some persons now may feel Dr. Sheldon has made it and did not remember me.
Yeah.
You're now wondering, why should I remember you?
Yeah.
You understand? And then some people think that as a problem to them, they don't want to associate with you. To get the value that they want. And that entitlement is now a limitation. And they're entitled because they don't have the information they need to know that your progress is the progress of doing these things. And if you're going to feel into it, it's going to become amplified.
Yeah.
Like what you're doing here. So shifting our mindset as young people, it's very important to the African development. The old people, well, they say that you cannot bend the dry trees. But for young people, I think it's just a mindset problem. We don't know where we came from, we don't know where we're headed, so anything goes. So that's what I want to say.
And thank you so much, Doc. You have highlighted very fundamental things. It was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, "The mind is the standard of a man." And I think part of our problem as Africans is our mind has been messed up. The only thing that has saved us, it was possible to inject it in our DNA. I think that's the one that has saved us, because our original DNA is still there. So it's going to take a lot of undoing, because we're the only continent that has gone through what we went through. Centuries of enslavement. You know, even the younger children of slaves then, who wanted to, with hot blood, wanted to, like, I don't want to serve that. The fathers will say, I've been doing this, the father before you has been doing this, stay down. So much that in this country of ours, Nigeria, for instance, you have, let's say, a Lebanese who is working, maybe, take a case in point. Go to these people making roads sometimes and see the way they talk to the locals that are working under them. I've witnessed this a couple of times. You know, they were building and then we needed to check on the farm. And they just needed to move so that they would open up. There was a long queue of people waiting. People would go, the man would just, and it's how he had turned the soldier that was attached to him as a weapon against the locals. I was like, he was going to whip. I walked him and I told him, officer, I have a lot of respect for soldiers. I didn't come here to undermine you. I'm just saying, can you just let them move? So maybe it's the way I spoke. I don't know. But eventually he opened up and we passed. But how many times have we joined forces with foreigners to undermine our own selves out of pure, clear inferiority complex? These people are not more than you. They can't speak better English than you. In fact, they cannot sit and have more intellectually engaging conversation than you. But because their own countries have made it possible and set the structure in place, these things that we pursue here as if our lives depend on it don't matter to them. So they have that leverage. That is why we use foreign standards to measure our own growth. We say GDP, that's a standard. We say per capita income. But it doesn't matter whether we have the highest per capita income. If the man in the village is not having a 3 square meals, it amounts to nothing. And that's why Julius Nyerere said that the white man can go to the moon for all he cares. The man in his village would measure success on how he's able to eat food, access to pipe-borne water, light in his house, a school for children to go to, an environment for creativity. So we must define these things for ourselves. What do you think the young person is asking for? It's not asking for too much, really. Opportunities to grow, not handouts. So I think it's, and like you said, we young people must do better by arming ourselves with the right knowledge. These people know, and that's why they consciously strip us of our heritage, of our knowledge of our history. I asked at the beginning of this conversation, how many of us can speak to the content of the Agenda 2063? How many of us know what is inside there? But if I say how many of us can talk about the SDGs, I mean, look at, and want to do better. Even us at Hub 17, we are going to print out the pillars of the Agenda 2063 so that we are the ones who are going to champion this agenda. That is the agenda upon which we say we missed it in 1963. 50 years after missing it, we say now we want to do better. So in 2063, Africa would have been 100 years since post independence, at least for the continent at several stages, what will we have to show that this demonstrates tangible growth? Not this situation where one country wakes up and say, I'm visa free. Why won't it be a collective continental declaration? I did an open signature thing to collect signatures of Africans who are saying no to visa limitations. I don't know how many have signed so far, but this is a cry that we must all commit to. And as Africans, I think we young people must also learn to collapse efforts together. It's the same error that our leaders made then that we're still making. Collaboration seems to be very foreign to us. You know, we are crazy for this so-called celebrity status. If it's not me, I don't care. If it's not my name on the door, I'm not involved. But when Nyerere got, because Tanzania was the first country in East Africa, I think, to gain their independence. He said he was willing to delay the independence of Tanzania so that other African countries other East African countries will catch up. That is the selflessness of a leader. When Kwame Nkrumah was suggesting for a united Africa without the dissolution of our sovereignties, he said he was not saying this because he wanted to be the leader over the continent. He said that for him, he's even proposing Congo to be the capital. That is the kind of thinking that our leaders at that time had. But now you have leaders who, with the complement of the so-called education that have acquired, have a taste for primitive wealth accumulation. Where somebody at the peak of their career, you hear they say the person stole trillions, billions, built hundreds of houses, when even in one room you cannot sleep more than one side of a bed. Primitive accumulation of wealth. And then it even becomes a thing of which leader stole more. That a leader is convicted because of something the court has found the person guilty of, and will say is witch hunting. So that is where we electors are culpable. We indulge it and we say it's our thief.
So I think another thing is the fact that
the
legislative arm is controlled by these people in power.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at our constitution, it does not spell out clear-cut implications of a government official. So a government official can embezzle billions and it's not sent, it's not put in prison, it's not sent to death. And then a roadside person steals something and then they sentence the person to life. So the constitution shields them.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a lot of things to go back to in our country and continent want to work well, because if the constitution is not well spelled out on the punishments that should be issued out to anybody that breaks the law, we don't have the law in the first place.
So it's tragic, because see what you just said now. The system doesn't apply everywhere. All right?
So I also want to be in power, so it doesn't affect.
Exactly. So and I don't feel happy about what I want to share now, but I will share it nonetheless. And this is the reason. You know, for those of you who are familiar with Boko, when you are exiting Makurdi to head to Boko, there's a checkpoint after the Air Force base, not the one of the Air Force base, where there's a police checkpoint around there. Last year, I was with my friend in the office. So my dad called me that he went to a bush market, bought something that was coming back, and the police stopped him there. And that he greeted them, and then they were like, he should stop them. So he said, no, he doesn't have money. And the other policeman slapped him. So when he now said that to me, I now left with my friend. So interestingly, I had left the orientation camp not too long ago, few days after that incident happened. So I was in talk with the head of public relations at the force headquarters here. So when I got there, the man was like, nobody should talk to him, blah, blah, blah. He can shoot anybody here, blah, blah. You know, you hear the way they brag, and it's crazy. So I pulled out my phone. I called the man. I was like, oh, Dr. Shadrach, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. Said, I'm fine. So I'm sorry to disturb. There's an incident. This is what happened. I was like, what? Put the person on call. Then the man now said, I don't want to talk to anybody. So the man now heard it. So he now said, put the phone on speaker. I did. So he now said, who is that person on the road saying he doesn't want to talk to whoever? So clearly he's a superior. So he now said, so after the whole thing, he was like, me now, what am I feeling like? I said, no. I came here, you slapped this man. This man didn't do anything to you. I came, let's resolve this thing. You were still out. And so if I know somebody in high authority that I can call to resolve this, best believe I'll call the person. That is the sad reality we are in now. So think about somebody that doesn't have that kind of contact. Think about the several times you have been stuck in with the police to resolve something, or they say they will extort you simply because they think you have nothing to do. Our politicians, do you think they don't know better because they have not traveled? Who has more access? In fact, for them, this visa thing we're talking about, they don't have the problem. Political immunity or diplomatic passports. So they are able to make access. I can tell you that if they are at a stoplight in a particular country, they will stop till it turns green before they will move. Why is it that back home, and I'll tell you why, there's no consequence. In the US or the UK or any of these other countries, there's consequence for beating traffic. There's consequence for embezzling funds. Here they will slap you with 5 years, you go and chill for 5 years, you come back and you still access those billions or whatever it is.
Or you go for that political position
and they will appoint you. So I think, like you rightly said, the legislative process needs to tighten up so that the law is blind to whoever is there. I was pursuing a case in court, even to get my first sitting. Only God knows how long it took. We ended up withdrawing the case. It took too long. So I was like, I mean, at the end of the day, if I get what I want, but it's going to cause a situation where I'm winning a war to lose a battle, or winning a battle to lose a war, there's no point. So that's why it comes down to the quality of political leadership we have in this country, or across Africa. We can't help it. But as young people, we will not do any different if we don't know better. That's the sad reality too. I've seen young people I wish I never met. Crooks in the most pure of their forms. You get it? So, as a young person, if you are vying to come and also effect change, and it does not reflect in character, I'm sorry, there's nothing different you're going to do. And maybe let me read what Dr. Gani says here before I will take it. I will take your thoughts too. He said African unity is very strong and sensitive matter. It's a very strong and sensitive subject matter. And the protagonists were selectively and ruthlessly fought against. Absolutely. And some were outrightly eliminated in the past. Examples are a legion. Yes. Nkrumah, Nyerere, MK Abiola, Gaddafi. Remember that Libya was our close to the only first the first world country in Africa. Libya had a per capita income and a GDP that rivaled European countries. Libya today, because of the destabilization of Libya, our country might never know peace. The Chad region might never know peace. But if I start having that conversation with a young person, I say part of our problem in Nigeria is because of Libya. They might not connect because they don't understand, maybe they don't understand the dynamics. So when I say Africa must always look at Africa as a unit, it is to our advantage. Because you might fold your hands that it's Nigeria's problem, it's not Ghana's problem. Which African country today can harbor a humanitarian crisis that comes out of Nigeria? 200 million people, which country will accommodate us? So these are the big picture conversations that sometimes we miss, and we just make casual and reckless statements that are intellectually insulting, but we do not understand the implication. Africa, and precisely Nigeria, that's what the truth is. Till Nigeria wakes up, we can be doing this merry-go-round. We are too pivotal to unlocking Africa's growth agenda. So, anyway, Gaddafi, Thomas Sankara, they were all Pan-Africanists. We now need a community of strong voices working together in a new strategy to foster our unity. Thank you so much, sir. What you have said is absolutely spot on, and you know, I wouldn't have been able to say it better. So, yes, you were. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. I just want to add to what Doctor was saying, and I want to say that this is an eye opener to me and maybe to other youth that are listening to this. Because to be sincere, before now, there are a lot of things that I get here that I don't have idea of, which I think is very sad, very, very sad, and that's what is happening. We are not interested, we the young people don't really show interest in the leadership of our country, talk more of our continent, and that's the first problem we have. Because you cannot have impact on what you don't have interest in, or you don't have idea of.
Solid.
So I think that's where we have to start. I mean, this hall would have been filled up with people, but then how many of us are here? And that's the sad reality. So thank you very much, sir, for this very impactful session. And then I want to say that another thing is, because of our disinterested attitude, we are now depending on people that will now give us direction. Then they are giving us wrong direction.
Yeah.
I don't need to give this example, but I belong to a student association where there was an issue and some student came up with an idea that, okay, let us protest. Some of us knew it was not the best option. Protesting was obviously not the best option, and many of them knew. But what happened? Some people, because that has affected them personally, and they feel that let me do whatever it takes to make sure that my own interest
is protected.
So they will now go around, rally down, and recruit some people.
Yeah.
And these are people that obviously don't have more idea of what to do because they don't care. I just want to read, pass, and go. But when it comes to this issue, surely somebody is coming to you to tell you that let's do this, and you make sure he convince you to know why doing this is important. So I think that's what is going on in the larger world. Our people coming, when it comes to election, we wait for people to give us direction. We are not interested. We don't know who is leading us. We don't know much more about our representatives. So we are waiting for somebody to come and tell us. Then aside that, we are stuck with doing one thing.
Yeah.
We don't want to diversify.
Yeah.
Yes. Like now, we are having challenges in making our continent a place to stay.
Yeah.
If you talk of climate change, how many of us have interest in acting against climate change? Very few people. Maybe because I am not studying forestry or something like that. So understand. So I think the first thing we need to do is to open our eyes, and then we, the young people, should also know that leadership is not necessarily by position, by impact that you create. If you are coming for something like this and we can at least get one person, you can make somebody understand why you should be here and what he or she will get after here. A lot of people don't know that this kind of gatherings are important. So I think that's where we have to start from. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What you said around leadership without a title is very instructive. And I think that's where the conversation around the Greek categorization of citizens, as people, of their people as idiots to tribalists to citizens coming. Sometimes, because of our way of looking at situations, we think it does not concern us. Your neighbor's house is on fire. You say, no, it's not my business. You are the only person you are appointed to lead, and you gather all the wealth and you impoverish every person. You think they are going to be subservient consistently under you till it boomerangs. So I think, and that's why at all times what I try to do is we need to know our place, the role we are supposed to take every time in every endeavor. And why that is important is this: all of us will not sit as governor of Benue State part-time all at once. In fact, if we lined up ourselves in the next 20 years for a 4 or 8 year tenure, how many of us can go through end to end? So it's practically not possible. So but you can now ask yourself fundamentally, what have I been enabling? The chairman, the councillor, the House of Assembly, Professor Lumumba of Kenya said, sometimes we know that the person who are brought into office is a pure dunderhead. Pure. But suddenly, once that person is, we are pushed the person's agenda and the person comes into power, we think that political office brings some level of immunity for lack of intelligence. So that the same persons who we knew that on a normal day will not even give them an opportunity to speak in gatherings, by courtesy of political office, we now finally relegate our capacities to collectively build to them. So I think we need to do better. How many times as electorates have we turned down people who genuinely would have contributed to growing systems simply because they don't come from where we are, or we don't like them, or
My friend doesn't like
or they told me that for you like this, I shouldn't work for you. Somebody told me that that this was even when I was a student, that he won't vote for me. I contested for ABMS president while I was in school. And the guy walked up to me. He said, I've never done anything wrong to him. And I know that I'll be expecting that he will vote me, but it's his brother is running against me, and he's just to clear his conscience that let me know that he's not voting for me.
That's nobody working against his conscience because you want to please the brother.
I won that election by 2 votes. 2 votes. 1, 2. 1, 2, like this. But that's the reality of the environment so far. So move away from the political space. Let's come into our work environment. As lecturers, you queue a proposal that could have flown and made waves simply because you don't like the guy whose name is beard on it. In an office space that you're supposed to pursue an agenda, you say you will not move forward on something because this person didn't sort you. You are giving interventions that are supposed to serve an interest, and you sit on it because you think that you have the capacity to do that. These are the sad realities we deal with on a daily basis. Because most times we are fixated on the political. One of my lecturers told me that if I know the amount of corruption in the academic ecosystem, I will pat the politician and apologize to them. But don't we see it? Have we not seen VCs who come on board and we see what they do in the name of project, and we're like, oh my God. So we can lament on and on and on and on and on, but as I wind down, the message is simple. The problem of Africa is not unknown to us. If you go through history, you'll find one of the most brilliant policies, roadmaps, plan of actions, conventions, declarations. Africa is like a graveyard of them. If you read through the Lagos Plan of Action, that document mapped out our journey to success as a continent. So what you see today as the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, that document you see is, in my own opinion, a replica of the 1980 Lagos Plan of Action. And I fear that the reality of it will still beckon on us if we fail to change and do better and solve and remove some of these barriers that are currently undermining us. You come to Nigeria, you pack raw materials in their raw form, and you purify it away in the name of going to go and refine and bring back. War zones where people are able to live in peace and are declared no-fly zones. Helicopters are still flying out of them with raw materials from our continent. Congo is a prime example. Sudan today has orchestrated one of the worst humanitarian crises in our modern history. How many times do we talk about it? How many times do we sit and discuss about this, the failures or the losses that are happening in Northeast Nigeria? We quickly spin up spaces to discuss the Ukraine-Russia war. We talk about the fact that the BRICS or whatever nations are trying to fall apart. We discuss about the economic agenda of the US. So we are a set of people who, in proverbial sense, have ignored the refuse right in our nose, only to concern ourselves with what, in effect, adds nothing to our current reality. Sudan has now been normalized, as it were. But that is the worst humanitarian, the country with the worst humanitarian crisis on God's green earth in today's era. Congo today, you hear one set of deaths happened. You go to southern Cameroon, you go to Chad, you go to northeast, you go to northwest, you come to north central. All of these things that are happening. And yet we are talking about the Africa 2063 agenda. So if we do not go back internally and resolve, I fear that Africa will never move forward. It might sound like it can never happen, but please let's not think for a minute that these things cannot happen. Because if a man suddenly cannot run the affairs of his home, let's talk about normal constitutional processes. Because the laws say when you are able to look after your children, are they not supposed to be sent to government-owned facilities to take care of them? No, even in principle. They're not there, of course, but even in principle, let's talk about a working system like the US. They will say that if you cannot look after your child, you take the child up to foster homes. So as a continent, if we fail to demonstrate that capacity, perhaps we will become the proverbial parent who has failed to look after their children and will need an external person to come and take after our children for us. What do you think such a parent will teach those children? It will teach them their systems. And that is why today, a parent will be proud and say, my child, the boy cannot speak to you like that too. This child has never left the shores of Nigeria. In fact, sometimes the shores of Benue State and the person cannot speak to you, and it becomes a claim to fame. When China would train their citizens in Chinese and Mandarin, and they will come and they'll be speaking to you in that language and they'll be doing interpreters. Does it limit them? Have you not seen the Chinese president speak in their language? And God help you if you cannot find an interpreter or a whatever transmitter to tell you what the man is saying. You are the one losing that, so it's not him. But I saw one lady who said she graduated BSc in Yoruba, and somebody came and sarcastically said, if you're ready for Babalawo job, I'll give you. Languages that we should protect and encourage people to go into, because we see them clearly going into extinction. We are not even incentivizing them. So if we don't open our eyes to these realities, we'll wake up one day and we'll realize that under our very noses, our history vanished because of our lack of action. Where in our homes we forbade that as Tiv people we should not speak Tiv, as Yoruba people we should not speak Yoruba, as Idoma we should not speak Idoma. Because in our minds, that is how we measure civilization. When the rest of the world are aggressively doubling down on enforcing their culture and their people, because if you want to ruin a people, take away their culture. Perhaps we are struggling now with identity crisis as a continent because of the impact of the slave trade. From the 7th century to the 18th century of being moved in millions, how will culture not be disrupted? Perhaps that's why in our own Nigeria, they are telling us that is the concubine of what's this man Lord Lugard that came and discovered River Niger. The same river that our ancestors drew livelihoods from. That you go to Uganda and you will overlay Lake Victoria, where thousands of generations lived off from, and they say is somebody Victorian. I don't know where the name came from. So I've moved away from government. I'm saying us. We need to double down on this thing we define as being touch or being civilized. We need to critique, we need to question what we define as civilization as a people. Where we go and look at a green area and carpet it and raise a building and say civilization. Where you wake up today and you want to go and sit somewhere to calm your brain and there's not one green area in a town or a city. And we define it as civilization. When across other parts of the world, they are reclaiming back their green areas, in our own part of the world, what are we doing? We're wiping it away in the name of civilization. We build fences as if we're building prison walls. Buy cars, hammer down into the minds of our children that hard work is no longer relevant. And then social media has made it worse. Where you can carry your car now and give somebody to wash for you. The guy carries it and starts driving and posting on social media. And then somebody else is killing himself because he saw somebody in the car. That car is not his own, no. But you that saw it on social media now will not allow yourself rest because you think that person is living a good life. It's a tragedy. Where now, before, our neighbors, if your neighbor says they will report it to your father, if you have a way of bribing your way out of it, you do it. But today, come and report now, the father will, or the mother will tell you that mind your business. That era when it took a community to raise a child, where a parent will carry a ruly child and take to the police station, that this one is the one that has been stealing our community. Now they will shield you. Now parents will take you and want to pay your way through school in the name of, say they will pay you to get good grades. They will pay for you to get employed. Say, I'm trying to raise money. Let me go and pay so that my son will get a job. That's the tragedy of the society we're living in now. But again, while we speak about these symptoms, we will not ignore the fact that there is a clear failure in leadership. Our leaders must build an environment that holds people to account, where the penalty for the man that stole a phone, it should never and can never be more than the one who stole billions. But that's our tragedy. So Lawyer Blaze says we really need to do better. This is my own. My own has killed us. So still emphasizing the point we have raised. So it's 12:06, and I want to thank you all so much. I don't know if there are any other reflections you want to throw out, but we can go on and on and on and on and on, but the goal is not to remind ourselves or peel off our scars to remind ourselves of the wounds we had. I started by chronicling our journey so that we will see that, yes, damage has been done to the African continent. People took us like commodities. Others still see us as commodities. So while they were building their economies, we were not home to build our own. Our young people were harvested at their prime and sold across the world. Millions of them did not even make it to those shores. They died at sea. A continent that cumulatively between the transatlantic and trans-Saharan slave trade took out close to 25 million people from this continent over a stretch of more than 6 centuries. That is no joke. And then the burden of colonialism came in for another close to 100 years. That thing can mess with somebody's mind. But we must also stop at this point blaming the erstwhile colonial master for our woes. Because I think we have been given enough time to make up for what has been lost. The West does not control our budgets. We sit and we agree that this is how much I want to spend for my country. The West is not the one that pilfers or steals from these things. So if these are the things that are happening differently on the continent, we must take responsibility both for the wins of the continent and also for the losses. So that if it's failure, let's agree that we have failed. But failure in itself, admitting it does not count for much if you are not taking responsibility to do better. And that is why to our African leaders, let the outcome of the General Assembly for the African Union in 2026 come out with more or different outcomes. Let the young African be able to move freely. And back in our homes, many Africans would rather stay home and grow than leave. And to conclude, I was leaving for the US last year, and an immigration officer, as he was just looking at my visa, was like, "Oh, you have a visa till 2029. I hope you're not planning to come back." I said, "Why won't I come back? I'm going for a conference. I'm back in 2 weeks." "Don't come back, oh." And then coincidentally, when I came back into the country, it was the same person I met. "You, this guy, I told you not to come, I still came back a bit." The point is, young people, frankly, if there was a way for me to hand my dad visa to somebody else, as he's taking off from Abuja or Lagos, or whichever airport is taking off from Nigeria, is waving the country bye-bye. So we must change our mindset to see that despite our current realities, it is not a verdict on who we are. Because for the hungry man, it is an illusion to think that your only problem, if you're online, light went off, but don't worry, we're still good. It's an illusion to think that your only problem is food, and that once you eat food, your problem is solved. It's a lie. It's until you eat that food that you realize that it was the least of your problem. That's the mindset for a lot of young people. They think that migration is, once they leave this country, their problems are solved. It's not true. It's when you tick that box that you realize that there are several other layers to it. We need to get our continent right so that young people who want to stay on this continent genuinely and contribute to our growth as a nation and as a people and as a continent will be able to do so. If not, we will continue having cases where our young people are perishing on a daily basis in the Mediterranean or being traded off in modern day slavery in Libya running across to Italy, all because they want to have a better life. And even when they are rescued, they say, please, don't take me back home. It's a tragedy. It's sad. And I think we must do better. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. This is Elevated Conversations, our February edition. I hope that our reflections and the thoughts shared here have carried in conversation of Africa for our collective good. And how do we are a continent that has a lot of prospects, but potential in amount to nothing if it's not harnessed. That was the message of our leaders, and that is why the letter that Nkosi Zana wrote to Kwame Nkrumah, the African continent, fundamentals. And those fundamentals are that we must enable all of the bottlenecks that currently internally undermine our and in our capacity to be able to do this. Thank you. And this is where we conclude. I'm not sure what our March edition would be, but keep it tuned and we look forward to another session of Elevated Conversations in March. We're sure we'll be able to communicate that when we get to it. Thank you. I'm ending the live now. Yeah. So.